Bill Spencer lay awake in the hush of his penthouse office, the city lights of Los Angeles glittering like a mocking constellation through the floor-to-ceiling windows, each one reflecting a fragment of his past mistakes. He could still see Luna's terrified eyes, the desperate stiffness of her body when law enforcement had cuffed her on his behalf, the momentary relief he had felt before remorse had seeped in like a slow, poisonous tide. He had sprung Luna from jail out of guilt, out of a perverse sense of obligation to the motherless child who once called Steffi Big Sister, and now he realized that mercy had only emboldened her darker impulses. He reached across the polished mahogany desk and shook the manila envelope that lay between stacks of financial reports and court filings. Inside was the damning evidence. Photographs of Luna stashing a sleek, black handgun in the hidden compartment of her tote bag, text message transcripts arranging clandestine meetings with the private investigator she had employed, forensic logs confirming her fingerprints on the weapon's handle. Bill swallowed, recalling how he had obtained these proofs from Lee Finnegan, Finn's mother, a woman he had once regarded as an ally in refining the Forrester-Spencer partnership, but who now stood at the epicenter of his greatest betrayal. Lee had confided her own horror upon discovering Luna's cache of weapons. She had begged Bill to keep the evidence under wraps, to shield her family, Steffi, Finn, and baby Hayes from another public calamity, but Bill could not abide by silence any longer. Luna was a ticking bomb, her resentment and obsession a threat not only to his grandchildren, but to the fragile peace he had brokered within the fractured Forresters. He intended to hand the dossier to the Malibu Police Department at first light, to watch Luna's dark ambitions collapse under the weight of the law, and perhaps, in doing so, redeem a fragment of his own tainted legacy. But before he could stand and dial the detective's number, his phone buzzed with a message from Lee that shattered his resolve like a bullet to the heart. Think twice, Bill. If you go public, you become the villain. I do this to protect Finn and Steffi. Bill's jaw clenched. He had underestimated Lee's maternal instincts. She viewed any threat to her son's world, however justified, as a personal vendetta. And now she would cast him as the aggressor, twisting his attempt to save them into a calculated power play. He pictured the headlines: Spencer patriarch weaponizes mother's love. Bill Spencer turns evidence against Luna into political weapon. Worse still, he foresaw the courtroom spectacle where Lee, under oath, would portray Bill as a manipulative magnate who used legal loopholes and personal favors to coerce cooperation, painting him as a merciless tyrant rather than the repentant grandfather he imagined himself to be. Across town, in the sun-dappled garden of the Forrester estate, Finn and Steffi were immersed in the delicate process of healing Hayes' psyche, unaware of the tempest brewing beyond their sanctuary. Finn had grown so used to his mother's protective shields that he would never suspect she was plotting to turn his own grandfather into a scapegoat. And Steffi, haunted still by Luna's betrayal, would instinctively rally to Lee's side, convinced that any crack in their united front would invite more danger for their child. Bill realized, with a sudden clarity that coursed like electricity through his veins, that Lee's loyalty had shifted from him to her bloodline, and that she would leverage every connection, every whispered rumor in the DA's office, every sympathetic ear in the press corps, to isolate him, to force him from the equation before he could reveal the full scope of Luna's menace. His mind raced through scenarios. Lee could plant clandestine dossiers in Finnegan-aligned blogs, brief anonymous sources in gossip rags, even coax Steffi into signing statements condemning Bill's reckless crusade. Meanwhile, outside forces loomed. Forrester Creations board members, already wary of Spencer influence, would seize upon any perceived quarrel between the clans as an excuse to sever ties, triggering a corporate divorce that would devastate both empires. Bill felt the weight of 1,000 scheming minds converging on him, determined to cast him as the enemy. Yet he could not back down. If Luna's arsenal of lies and weapons remained hidden, she would strike again, and this time no one could foresee the carnage. He slid to his feet, smoothed the lapels of his tailored blazer, and grabbed his phone. "I've made my decision," he whispered into the darkness, dialing the detective's number. "We move at first light." By dawn, Bill was standing in a nondescript suburban police station, the manila envelope clutched in one hand, his expression a composed mask of righteous determination. The detective raised an eyebrow as Bill laid out the photographs, the ballistics report, the recorded geographic data pinpointing Luna's hiding place for the weapon. It took only minutes for the precinct captain to assemble a squad, issuing warrants for Luna's arrest on charges of unlawful weapons storage, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and endangering an infant. Bill watched as evidence numbers were scrawled in chalk on plastic bags containing the gun and the now infamous L bracelet, feeling a perverse relief wash over him, even as he knew that he would pay a steep price in retaliation. By midday, the news cycle had exploded. Every entertainment site and morning show was ablaze with the scandal. Lee's counterattack was swift and brutal. She released a carefully worded statement condemning Bill's sensationalist tactics, asserting that he had withheld exculpatory evidence from the family and accusing him of weaponizing desperation for personal vendettas. Lee's allies in the media, the same reporters who had once fawned over Bill's business acumen, now circulated anonymous tips that Spencer Publications had quietly funded the private investigator who trailed Luna, insinuating collusion rather than good faith. Social media hashtags trended. Hashtag Spencer Sniper, hashtag Bill the Bulldozer, rallying public sentiment against the man who dared to expose Luna. Finn, confronted with the headlines over his morning coffee, froze as he read Lee's excerpt. "My children come first, and I will not allow them to be collateral damage in Bill Spencer's relentless pursuit of power." Anger boiled in Finn's chest, anger at Luna's crimes, yes, but hotter still at his own mother's betrayal of the truth. Steffi, upon learning Bill's involvement, felt a fracture open within her, loyalty to Finn's family versus gratitude to the man who had once helped her navigate corporate warfare and private heartbreak. She called Bill, her voice a blend of hurt and confusion. "Why would you do this? You promised you'd protect Hayes, not drag his world into the mud." Bill's answer was simple, because the alternative was far worse. "Luna still has another gun hidden somewhere, and when she finds it, no one will be safe." In the days that followed, the war between Spencer and Finnegan erupted on multiple fronts. At Spencer Publications, Bill's board of directors convened emergency sessions, some members openly questioning his judgment, others taking sides to gain leverage in an increasingly polarized company. Rumors swirled that Liam Spencer, Bill's eldest son and Wyatt's half-brother, was being groomed as a temporary CEO should Bill be forced to step aside. Meanwhile, at Forrester Creations, Lee marshaled support among the designers and executives who had grown wary of Spencer influence since the merger talks had begun, arguing that Bill's tactics jeopardized the creative heart of the company and threatened the safety of all employees. Legal teams descended on both families like vultures, filing motions to block asset transfers, secure temporary restraining orders, and issue subpoenas for every document referencing Luna. Share prices of both Spencer Publications and Forrester Creations plummeted as investors fled the chaos, seeking steadier ground in rival firms. Public opinion, swayed by Lee's relentless campaign, blamed Bill for tearing apart a family that was once an emblem of reconciliation between the Forresters and the Spencers. The final blow came when Steffi, with tears in her eyes, announced on her personal blog that she could no longer stand by a man who weaponized his own grandson's safety for headlines, distancing Hayes from Bill indefinitely. In that moment, Bill felt the true cost of his crusade, not just the erosion of his reputation or the destabilization of his empire, but the cold severance of the bond he had cherished with his family. Yet, as the storm raged, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. Because buried within every act of betrayal lay the root of a greater betrayal, Luna's willingness to harm a child she once loved. And Bill, for all his flaws and miscalculations, would not allow that darkness to claim another innocent life. The war between Spencer and Finnegan was only just beginning, but Bill braced himself for the battles ahead, certain that, in the end, truth and protection of the vulnerable would prevail over political expediency and maternal fear, even if it meant standing alone in the rubble of his own making. Bill Spencer awoke the next morning to the shrill ring of his phone, the city's dawn barely whispering through the penthouse curtains, and steeled himself for another round in a battle that threatened to consume every facet of his life. His reflection in the window showed steel-gray eyes hardened by a week of betrayal, but also a spark, defiance refusing to be snuffed out. Over his tailored charcoal suit he wore the single adornment he now prized above all. A simple silver chain bearing an engraved H for Hayes, an emblem of the only soul he would sacrifice himself to protect. Below in the lobby, security guards briefed him on new threats, anonymous letters laced with veiled warnings, photographs left on his desk showing Hayes in the stroller, shots captured from vantage points Luna had once used. Every corridor of Spencer Publications seemed rigged with the remnants of Luna's ghost. Yet Bill knew that fear could not be the heir to his legacy. Action would be. He summoned his most trusted lieutenants to the boardroom, bypassing PR consultants and legal drones for the voices that had shaped his empire. Valerie, his chief operating officer whose calm mind had saved deals when profits teetered on collapse, and Marcus, his longtime head of security, a former DEA agent whose methods were as unorthodox as they were effective. In hushed tones, Bill outlined Operation Guardian, a plan to shield Hayes and regain the narrative. A three-pronged strategy of legal pressure, media control, and protective custody. First, legal pressure. Bill would file a motion in federal court seeking full disclosure of Lee Finnegan's communications with law enforcement and media outlets, alleging a conspiracy to defame him and obstruct justice. Anticipating her preemptive countersuits, he would also dispatch a covert investigator to trace the digital breadcrumbs of her campaign, metadata, IP addresses, unregistered burner phones. Building an airtight case that Lee had not acted as a protective mother, but as an active saboteur. Second, media control. Bill insisted Valerie orchestrate a tell-all interview with a sympathetic news anchor, one who would allow him to explain his motives without distortion, framing his actions as a grandfather's wrath against a lurking menace, rather than a mogul's power grab. He wanted to show the photographs of Luna's cache, the ballistic tests proving she had wielded that gun with reckless intent, interspersed with family footage, Hayes's first steps in his arms, bedtime stories beneath Christmas lights, so that viewers could see both horror and love in their proper context. And third, protective custody. Marcus would arrange for Hayes to enter a federal witness protection style program under the guise of enhanced VIP security, relocating him to a secluded estate under new identities for mother and child, with rotating teams of guards, encrypted communication channels, and contingency plans for every conceivable threat. As Bill laid out each component with the precision of a corporate takeover, Valerie and Marcus exchanged glances. They had seen his resolve before, but never on such a personal battlefield. They nodded, knowing that not even Spencer Publications had ever demanded resources on this scale, but also understanding that some lives were worth more than any profit margin. While the plan assembled itself under the fluorescent lights of the boardroom, Across town, Lee Finnegan paced the pristine hallways of her own home, her cell phone pressed to her ear as she berated a high-ranking DA investigator for leaking details of her statement to the press. She spoke of family honor, of maternal duty, of Bill's monstrous ambition, hoping to ignite a spark of public outrage before his narrative could take hold. But in the back of her mind, nagging at her conscience, was the knowledge that Hayes's safety, not her reputation, mattered most. Every step she took in this war would leave footprints on the child's psyche. Despite her attempts to cloak her actions in righteous protection, she feared she was merely exchanging one tyrant for another. Meanwhile, Steffi and Finn, feeling the tremors of conflict reverberate through every corner of their lives, met in the nursery under the soft glow of the nightlight, Hayes sleeping soundly in his crib, clutching the rebranded Hope box against his chest. Steffi's hand trembled as she placed a fresh stuffed rabbit beside him, while Finn stared at the baby monitor's static screen, whitening knuckles gripping the edge of the changing table. "We can't keep losing sleep like this," Steffi whispered, voice brittle. "Mom's leading a smear campaign against Grandpa, and he's filing federal charges against her. It's tearing us apart." Finn exhaled, his MD-trained calm faltering. "I know, my love. But if Dad is right about Luna's plan, every moment we delay could be Hayes's last safe one. We need to trust Bill, reluctantly, if we must, and help with Operation Guardian." Steffi's brows knitted. "Can I trust him?" she asked, voice cracking. "He sacrificed so much for us, but this feud, this nuclear option, could destroy my relationship with Mom." Finn reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "These aren't corporate rivals, Steffi, they're family. They make mistakes. But sometimes family fights dirty to protect each other. Let's work with Dad, gather our own evidence, and broker a peace once Hayes is safe." With that uneasy alliance formed, Steffi and Finn set about their own clandestine mission. Poring over Luna's notebook entries that police had released to the family, tracing her patterns, predicting her next moves. They realized Luna's obsession had shifted since her capture. No longer content with physical revenge, she had begun plotting to fracture the Forresters and Spencers permanently through legal and social warfare. Her diary hinted at plans to leak confidential Foster, Logan financials, to blackmail Steffi with intimate photographs, to handpick scandalous article snippets for tabloid broadcasting. Her assault had gone from physical to reputational. That revelation hardened Steffi's resolve. This was not merely a struggle between Bill and Lee, but a war for the soul of their families, and only unity could prevail. As Operation Guardian swung into motion, Bill found himself in federal court, standing before Judge Marquez, a stern jurist known for her disdain of headline-seeking litigants. The courtroom brimmed with reporters, unionized bailiffs, and Lee's legal team draped in conservative suits. Bill's lawyer presented the motion for discovery, detailing Lee's coordinated leaks with news outlets and her refusal to share the Luna weapon evidence with prosecutors. For emphasis, they displayed side-by-side images, Luna's purse-lipped smile planting the gun in her bag, and the fear-tinged snapshots of Hayes abandoned on the beach. The courtroom murmured. Lee's counsel rose in rebuke, accusing Bill of manufacturing evidence and abusing his power to intimidate family members. But then Judge Marquez silenced the room with a single rap of her gavel. "Mr. Spencer," she said evenly, "family disputes seldom justify federal intrusion. However, when a child's life is demonstrably at risk, the court has no choice. I grant your motion for discovery, and I will appoint an independent special master to oversee the gathering of communications. Miss Finnegan, compliance is expected immediately." Lee sat perfectly still, her composed mask cracking just beyond her eyes. Bill allowed himself a subtle nod of triumph. Back in the media sphere, Valerie unveiled Bill's exclusive interview on a primetime news show. Seated behind a desk, Bill spoke of his regret in arranging Luna's release from custody, of his horror at her hidden arsenal, and of his oath to keep Hayes safe at all costs. Carefully interwoven were clips of Hayes's childhood, first birthday cupcakes, Christmas morning squeals, before cutting to Luna's weapon footage. The juxtaposition struck a chord with viewers, and social media tides turned. Hashtags like #GuardianGrandpa and #ProtectHayes trended, drowning out Lee's earlier smear. Lee found her own allies scrambling for cover as public sentiment demanded cooperation rather than division. At dusk, the final, and most critical, phase of Operation Guardian was set. Hayes would be moved to the secure estate, with Finn and Steffi adopting new identities temporarily, school records sealed, digital footprints scrubbed. Marcus's team assembled armored SUVs, chartered a private helicopter, and coordinated with local law enforcement for an unobtrusive escort. Bill himself arrived to witness the transfer, his heart battered by the weight of leaving his grandson's side. He knelt beside Hayes, brushing back wisps of soft hair, voice trembling. "You're my world, little one," he murmured. "I'll always keep you safe." Steffi placed Hayes into Marcus's arms, leaning into Finn as he whispered, "Be brave, my baby." The convoy glided out of Los Angeles under cover of twilight, shields of tinted glass obscuring its precious cargo. As the SUVs pulled away, Bill watched until they faded into the horizon, the silver chain bearing the H glinting against his chest. In that moment, Bill understood the true nature of his fight. It was not for power or vindication, but for innocence itself. And though the war with Lee Finnegan had unleashed forces that might never fully settle, he had forged a new unity between the warring clans, a fragile truce born of shared love for one child that transcended every feud. The road ahead would be fraught with legal battles, corporate upheavals, and lingering wounds of betrayal, but Bill Spencer, veteran of 1,000 boardroom wars, now led the most consequential campaign of his life. And he would not rest until every weapon of fear lay dismantled, every lie exposed, and the name of Spencer once more stood for protection, not power. And somewhere, in the hush of the secure estate, baby Hayes slept on, blissfully unaware of the sacrifices made in his name, the war fought in his shadow, and the promise etched in silver next to his heart, that love, even amid the fiercest battle, would always triumph.